Hi, I just thought I'd pop online and talk about something that affects lots of families with children with special needs, and that is what is today going to bring? Um, we live in a life where we're never 100% certain of what a day will bring to us because something out of the normal may happen. So, I'm going to give you an example of Boxing Day, and this being Erin, it's got some laughter and some fun in it, but it might give some sort of insight into the unpredictability of our lives, which I think probably explains in many ways why I really like to be ahead of the game when I can be, four times like this, because I could suddenly have 3 or 4 days wiped out because of a sudden hospital visit. So Boxing Day last year, that's 2022, almost said 2023, it's 2022, Boxing Day, dawned at a completely normal day. We had breakfast normally, Erin was out in the garden playing. I came in and lay on the floor and started crying. Erin also gets a thing called riggers, which you'll be able to see from one of the videos I've done when I put the photo of her having a riggers session up, because we wanted to see if there was seizure activity at the same time as the riggers. So all of a sudden she was in the state that you saw in the video where she's shivering and completely sort of not with it at all. After that she had a couple of seizures from really quick succession, so enough for our plan, our seizure plan, then says we can give midazolam as a rescue or emergency medication. We're actually at the stage where we can give midazolam because we know it works and it doesn't have an issue. She doesn't have any after effects with it, but we don't have to phone an ambulance after giving it. We're allowed to monitor her at home. But I gave the midazolam and I said I'm phoning the ambulance as well. I'm not happy. This is quite abnormal. So we had at that stage lifted her onto our bed, and she was shivering as badly. And then the ambulance turned up. After the ambulance had been here a couple of minutes, she had another really large seizure. And it was important the ambulance was here because after we've given midazolam, we can't give more midazolam. There's nowhere for us to go apart from with an additional medication that the ambulance carries, which we'd never had to use before. So in this situation, my gut instinct was phone the ambulance as well. So I phoned the ambulance and it was just as well. So we got taken into hospital. Obviously, so that was Boxing Day, probably about 11 o'clock, 11:30 in the morning, somewhere around there. By which time everyone had stopped preparing the food for the day because we kind of all knew that Boxing Day wasn't going to happen. It was no point in starting the food because no, this was going to be a day in hospital. So on the way to the hospital, a mark on her hand came up, started to come up really big, and we looked when we were at the hospital. She had a few more seizures, and the hand was coming up a lot. So it looked like a cat scratch. We do have a cat, and Erin does try and stroke him really nicely on his head. Sometimes he will swipe out. So it looked like a cat scratch. So to cut a very long story short, our seizure in the morning led to 3 days in hospital because of a cat scratch. Now, we kind of laugh, and we're not laughing because we understand it could be very serious. And there was obviously a really big infection going on in her hand. So much so that at one point we're sitting there and plastics have come down and they're looking and wondering if they need to do an operation. I'm like, what is going on? This is how bizarre not how bizarre, but how things can sometimes snowball. So Erin spent 3 days in hospital. She had a splint put on one hand, not that bad hand, but on another hand, so they could get a line in because when she's in hospital, she very often goes on hunger strike and she won't take medication. So if you've got a line in, it's very good because we have more options. So she had a line in and her hand was in a splint, so she couldn't move it or wiggle the line out. So Erin had decided that because she had her arm in a splint, she couldn't walk anywhere. She was incapable of doing anything at all. Um, she just like hop, hop, which is help. Her version of it, hop, hop, hop. I'm like, you've got this hand, Erin. It works fine. And she was like, oh, hop, hop. And then she decided she couldn't get in and out of the bed and various things like that. So we were really, putting her in and out of the bed, everything. So this Erin decides she can't do anything. However, one night, James was staying in the hospital, and there's a lazy boy next to the bed. The next thing, he's like going to sleep, I think. So the next thing he knows is the nurse has come back into the cubicle with Erin, who had decided, despite the fact that she can't do anything in the daytime, even like lift her blanket up or press what she wants on her iPad, she would wiggle herself down to the bottom of the bed, get out of the bed and go for a walk around the children's ward. So that was our little Erin, having a bit of a laugh at us as she does, and not being able to do anything with her hands. But also, I'm kind of using this story as a trying to explain how sometimes our life is very different. Sometimes we don't commit to things because we think there's a chance something could happen. Other times we commit to things, but we always a little bit like, will it happen? Won't it happen? And so Erin had basically got an infection from the cat scratch, and she'd had a really bad reaction. She had IV antibiotics, bloods, more, and then they changed the antibiotic because it wasn't working, and then more bloods, and it went on like that for 3 days till we came out of hospital to find the Christmas period well and truly over, and moving on with our lives. And people say, what did you do? We're like, well, Boxing Day led to 3 days, a cat scratch, 3 days in hospital because of a cat scratch. So that is how sometimes life rolls with us. And sometimes that's why when things are going well, I always try and keep ahead of the game for times like that. So those 3 days. I'm also a beekeeper. I had people picking up nukes on those 3 days. I was at the hospital. So luckily, my son also has trained now as a beekeeper, so he beekeeps with me, so he was able to take over that part. But it's one of the reasons I like to try and make sure I know where I am. I'm a few days ahead. I've got a few days ahead in planning and things for those days that are completely wiped out and your plans completely changed. Okay, I will sign this off for now, and I hope you just enjoyed our little bit of our life changing things.